So today I'm going to talk a little bit from my personal experience. And while I've never held the job title project manager, my last role was as a communications person. Before that, I did a lot of admin work. And so project managing was a big part of both of those jobs. All that to say, I have done it professionally. I wouldn't say I'm a professional project manager. And so if you know one of those, it would be great to kind of pick their brains on how they approach tasks in their regular life. I think that would be a fascinating conversation to have. But from my perspective as someone who has done some of this professionally, I did want to talk about how to think like a project manager, because I feel like there are certain jobs and certain tasks. I'm not saying this is a be all end all, but there are certain jobs and certain tasks where thinking like a project manager can really help you stress less about the thing that you want to get done. And it's going to help you move forward in a way that isn't quite as overwhelming, right? It's also really helpful to think like a project manager so that you can set realistic expectations for yourself and others, because that's oftentimes where I get into trouble, especially if it's a project that's just me. When I put my project manager hat on and I think about this, in terms of if I were assigning it to somebody else or what a reasonable time frame would be, it's a lot easier for me to go, oh, okay, I see I am being really optimistic here, and let's move that to a more realistic timeline so I'm not stressing myself out or beating myself up when I don't make the deadline. Case in point on this, when we bought our house, we were really lucky because we bought it, and from the day that we closed to the day that we needed to move out of our apartment, we had about a month. So we had a month in which we could do whatever kind of house projects we wanted to do, after work and on weekends and stuff. Obviously, we wanted to make the most of that time, but the problem was that when we started talking about all the things that we wanted to do, there were different things that needed to be done, and some of them were dependent on other things getting done. And I quickly realized that even though our house really didn't need a lot of things to be done when we moved in, there were too many things that we needed to do or wanted to do for it to just exist in our heads or on a piece of paper somewhere. And so I actually put together in Asana, I don't know what they call them, board or spreadsheet or something, but I got an Asana account and I created a project where I planned out all the things we wanted to do before we moved in, and then all the things that could wait until after we moved in. Most of the time, you're not going to need Asana or ClickUp or Trello or any of those project management tools that are out there. You can use a simple pen and paper list or a spreadsheet or whatever you like to use. Okay, so here is how you think through a project or task or whatever it is you are calling the thing that you're doing, like a project manager, so that it helps you to reduce stress in your life. First, figure out what actions you need to take to get the thing done. This serves a lot of purposes, actually. If you break something down into the steps that you need to take to get it done, and then if those steps are really big, you can divide those into smaller steps as well. This does a few things. First, it shows you exactly what you need to do to get from where you are to where you want to be. And having that list of things that you need to do actually helps you not feel as overwhelmed a lot of times. I mean, if there's a lot of steps to do, it may still be overwhelming. So warning there. But a lot of times just seeing what you need to do is less overwhelming to you personally. Second of all, if it is overwhelming still, or you're wow, this is a lot, and I don't think that I can get it done in the time that I need to get it done, then suddenly you have a list of steps, and there are a lot of things that you can do with that list of steps. One of them is to say, okay, what are the most important parts of this, and how far can I get in the time that I need? So for example, if I'm cooking a meal, and, say we're having people over, and I have in my mind the list of steps that need to be done, I will often save some of those less important steps, so sides or whatever, for the end. And part of that is because if I don't make those and I just have an entree on the table when our people come over, usually that's enough. They're not going to complain that I didn't serve them a fancy or big enough meal. Second of all, if my husband comes in the kitchen and he says, "Hey honey, how can I help?" which he usually does, unless like there's some sort of emergency or he's cleaning the house or something like else. If he comes in and says, "Hey honey, how can I help?" I usually put him on side duty. I say, "Oh, okay, like great. The Brussels sprouts need to be halved. They need to be washed and halved and seasoned and put in the air fryer. Do you think you can do that?" Or, if he comes in a little earlier than I'm expecting, he can help me, chop things up and prepare them for the meal. And so I know everything I have to do. And so if someone comes along who can help, I'm better able to just have them come in and help because I have this idea of what actually needs to be done and kind of in what order and what's the most urgent. All of those things are kind of accounted for. So basically, dividing it up in a list helps you digest it in smaller chunks, which is really helpful and can help you be less overwhelmed. And the second thing is it helps you eliminate or delegate things that maybe you don't need to be doing or you don't have time to do. And I should mention that if you do this step, you divide it all up into the steps, and then those steps you divide into more specific tasks, and you feel overwhelmed by like the whole thing, that's totally normal. That's okay. What I do want you to look at is I want you to look at the individual steps. Focus on each individual step. And if one seems overwhelming for some reason, that's probably a good time to ask yourself why it seems overwhelming. It may be, because it's still too vague. And so you look at it and you go, I don't know what that means. I don't know exactly what I need to do. And so now I'm freaking out again. That's really easy to fix. It may also be because there's something else going on that you're really nervous about. Like maybe it involves asking somebody for help. That's a big one for me. Or maybe you're just nervous about how it's going to go. All of those things are worth considering because if you don't kind of go through that and process those emotions, you're probably just going to procrastinate to try to keep putting off that thing that you don't want to do, and you won't understand why you don't want to do it. And so it's really good to be able to just look at that list and go, okay, this specific thing is still making me feel overwhelmed. Why is that? And try to do what you can to address it. And there's no shame in asking somebody for help with those things that are harder. For me, sometimes if there's something that I have to do and I don't want to do it, I will talk to my husband about it. And sometimes that means I just talk to him about it and then I feel a little bit better or a little bit braver. And I have that accountability. And so then I go do it. Sometimes I talk to him about it and I ask him if he would do it for me. And then sometimes I talk to him about it and then I ask him to be in the room with me while I do it because it makes me less nervous when he's around for some reason. That's kind of sappy, but it's true. So there are things you can do once you know where the problem is to try to help you move past it or to have someone else help you move past it. You can hire somebody or like whatever, but just so that you know, okay, if I want to get from here to there, here's what I have to do. And here's the part that I'm really getting hung up on. How do I either get through this or have somebody else do it for me, right? Or maybe just eliminate it altogether. In some cases, that's also an option, right? Okay, the second thing that you're going to do now that you have all of these tasks is make sure that you've arranged them in the order that you want them done. This can either be on paper, like I said, on a spreadsheet. That's usually a little bit easier to drag things around, or like on a doc where you can copy and paste. But any way works. If you're doing it on paper, I would recommend just making like a list, kind of writing it all out with like bullet points and then going through and making like a number list the second time. This step helps you consider, first of all, what's most urgent that needs to get done, because those things will normally go at the top of your list. And second of all, it helps you consider any sorts of relationships between the things on your list as part of your project. So for example, when I am making my YouTube videos, and I'm actually going to do an example video, like follow-up of this process. I'm going to put it into Asana and kind of help you like see how this process works out in real life in a different video. But like when I'm making a YouTube video, one of the most urgent things is recording the videos, right? Another thing is editing them. But there are a lot of smaller steps that go as part of that and actually need to go first, even though they may not be like urgent. So part of recording the videos is coming up with the idea for the videos. And that actually has to happen first before I can record it. I can't just say, okay, recording is the most important and sit down. It is the most important part and it needs to be high priority and it has to come before editing. But what has to come very first is deciding what the video topic is going to be about. And so you're going to take your list of things and you're going to decide what the most important parts are. You're going to put those near the top. But at the very top, you're going to put the things that you need in order to get to those most urgent things down the road. The third thing is you're going to take a look at your list or board or whatever you have, and you're going to ask yourself, realistically, how long should this take? Not how long you think you can do it if you are having like a super amazing day, but like how long if you were managing somebody else who was like averagely good at this thing, how long would it take? And then, you can write those hours down next to it, or you can just keep those in mind. But this step really forces you to have a realistic timeline. And if you get it done ahead of schedule, great. But one of the things about project management is that when you are thinking through and assigning deadlines, you have to assume that things will go wrong. Because if you don't, you create a lot of stress on the people and the software involved. And you also run the risk of putting projects behind, which usually in a professional context is not a good thing. It's much, much better to tell your boss a time frame that's a little bit generous so that you have time for those things when things go wrong, than to just make it as short as possible and then have to keep getting extensions, right? There's no boss that wants to keep approving extensions for a project. They want it done when you said it would be done. And so when you're project managing something, you have to keep that in mind. And things often go wrong. And that also allows you to be less stressed and more gracious when they do. Okay, and then the final step is just assigning deadlines and team members to each of those tasks as needed. So if this is a personal project that you are trying to project manage, which is what I'm assuming that most of us are going to be doing who are watching this channel, the team members on all of the tasks involved in this project may be you. And that's okay. You can just say, okay, this is all me. But if you have somebody who can help you, it's okay to do that too. Now you have a plan, and so you know exactly when their thing needs to be done and what it is, hopefully. And so you're able to assign those tasks better. You're also able to assign deadlines. If you know something has to be done before something else can be done, you assign that deadline earlier, and then you make sure that you back it up enough to get it all done by the end date. Normally, when I'm doing this, I'll go through and I'll say okay, ideally, how long would I have for each of these steps? And then I'll look at the end date and I'll go, okay, that wasn't the end date I had in mind, right? And so then I can tweak things a little bit and I can say, okay, instead of it taking 2 weeks because I was really generous in all of these numbers, let's go back, take kind of more of an average number and get it down to 1 week because that's what I was hoping for. Or, whatever, you just go ahead and assign some deadlines. And I have a love-hate relationship with deadlines. I don't think anybody likes having a deadline looming over their head, but here's the beautiful thing about deadlines, especially when you are assigning them yourself, okay? When you get something done by the deadline, it gives you a small reason to celebrate. And then whether or not you get it done, it also gives you a little bit of a checkpoint to make sure that you are on track for the timeline that you originally set. And then okay, if I make it, great. If I make it with plenty of time to spare, even better. If I don't, let's check in and figure out how long this is realistically going to take, and figure out what is taking its place and if that's more or less important. You can have this awareness of why it's not working, which again is going to help you figure out how to get this thing done that you actually want to get done. Okay, and so I mentioned this at the beginning of this episode, and I'm going to say it again, but this method is not necessarily a good fit for every single task that you do. There will be some that you just have to do them, and they're overwhelming and you're not exactly sure how to proceed. And for those kinds of projects that seem really too big, I think that thinking like a project manager is a perfect way to do that. It's a great way to make sure that you are considering whether or not you can bring in help. And it's also just a great way to help you focus on one little thing at a time instead of this overwhelming big thing that you have to do. You're forcing yourself to be realistic about the work involved and the time frames. And you're building in these small steps where you can celebrate or check in and change course along the way, all of which are really, really helpful to actually getting you from where you are to where you want to be on the project.